One thing you can say about airports is that in many cases they do form a particular pattern, and most of it is based around design standards which is presented by ICAO in terms of the design and operation of facilities. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, the airport is going to be one of those areas that can slow down the movement of cargo. So any ways of mitigating those delays are certainly well worth looking into. Combination carriers typically don't have any option, but they will require a passenger terminal, where in many cases your integrators will be looking to operate in airports that don't offer fewer passenger movements. I think we're all probably pretty familiar with this particular site if you've ever been up in a plane. I don't necessarily have to talk in too much detail in this regards. The setting up of the airport is, I guess, quite a strategic decision. Usually there's some level of agreement on where the prevailing winds are. So the prevailing winds are typically going to follow the direction of the runways. Obviously, you can have more than one runway, and most runways you will note that most of the markings are in white marks, and you'll also find a couple of numbers on there as well. The letters are in English. That's the standard for airports globally, and you might be able to make out a 22R, and the 22 is a reflection of the compass point with the 0 dropped off, so 220. So that particular runway is pointing in the direction of the compass point 220. So that's somewhere between south and west, so a southwesterly sort of distance. It's also, it says R just relates to the fact that there are two runways there. That's the right-hand airport. And there's a lot of other nomenclature that you might find in and around airports. Interestingly, what might you do if the tarmac or the runway was covered in snow? It's going to make the marking a little bit hard to follow. Obviously there's de-icing options available at the airport, but what you will find is in some of those airports, like in Japan it occurs, Norway it occurs, that their writing is actually in yellow, not white, just so it'll show up. So just a little odd fact there. Now, when we talk about taxiways, as you can appreciate, that's the aircraft that you can see lined up, ready to go on the main runway along here. Typically that's an important component on the airport as it takes the aircraft onto the runway or off the runway into the terminal and or terminal buildings and hangar. Of course, the airport's got to have designated, dedicated airport parking areas. So as you can see there, you've got a terminal there. It's on the apron of the air side of the airport, and there will be a dedicated area for air cargo planes to unload, which has got enough space for handling equipment and also the necessary storage facilities. In addition to that, a cargo terminal at a passenger airport isn't typically right with, it's further away from the passenger airport, because the passenger airport is purely and simply in the main for the offloading of passengers. So it's important that there's landside access for not only cargo vehicle parking, but also to handle cargo that's coming from the passenger side of the airport to the cargo terminal. In addition to this, if you're operating a transshipment, perhaps you're getting some goods that are coming in by sea and then moving on to the airport, you're going to need appropriate trunk roads to get to that particular airport in quite a speedy fashion. At airports, there's a range of physical facilities. Now, we've seen the unit load device on a number of occasions. Just a more economic way of moving goods. Freight forwarder, cargo airline, handling agent will combine their packages into the unit load devices. Don mentioned in regards to the types of that particular form of unit load device, the LD3, is actually 50% of the unit load devices in the aluminium variety are of that particular style. It's the most popular standard container, and it's the typical type of container that you find on the Boeing 747, McDonnell Douglas 11, Boeing 777, etc. Of course, when we speak about unit load device, we're also talking about pallets, even though it's a little bit more of a simpler type of option, constructed mainly on wood. Number of considerations there that you might want to take into, obviously, load weight, and generally most goods that find themselves on a pallet shrink wrapped or fixed with nets. And there's a range of considerations prior to using those. It's important for them to be really clean. Most pallets coming into Australia are fumigated or certainly inspected to ensure that they're not soiled. Unit load devices is also a bit of a conundrum in many ways. They're easily damaged. Theft may occur, and they often find themselves away from where their original point of departure was. And that's caused mainly by some of those directional imbalances. We know when we were looking at the movement of cargo around the globe that in some directions, from Europe to Asia, for example, there's quite an imbalance compared to Asia to Europe. So in that particular scenario, you're going to find a lot of unit load devices just sitting around airports and being in the wrong location. Unit load devices are quite expensive, particularly the aluminium types. And to mitigate this scenario, IATA, who's the peak body for Air Transport Association, have set up a control centre to control the movement of unit load devices around the globe, to ensure that they speedily return to their owner. And for an airline, they pay an annual fee, which will facilitate that service for them. So I guess you could summarise cargo terminal facilities as being owned by and operated by a number of different entities. That's just an example of some of the entities that own cargo terminal facilities. A private company, for example, the Australian Pacific Airports Corporation, own Melbourne Airport and Launceston Airport. So you've got a range of different entities that undertake that, and of course at all those terminals you require warehouses for on-airport delivery and assembly, and also an area for unit load devices. Of course, all goods coming into the airport will be required some form of inspection unless you've signed up to the Trusted Trader Scheme, and inspection may not be required. So key considerations in regards to designing a cargo terminal are typically issues around the cost associated with any space, any land around an airport is very expensive. So it's important that if you're building a new cargo terminal, in most cases it's going to be multi-storey or multi-level. And if you can't take advantage of that opportunity, then you're going to look for some space outside of the terminal itself. A general standard in terms of an air cargo terminal efficiency works out on the basis that if you have on average 15 to 18 tonnes of cargo per square metre per annum in your terminal, you can operate it without automation. If you have more than that, then typically the suggestion is that automation is going to make that more economical and efficient for you. And mindful of the fact that much of the air cargo handle is going to be loose rather than unitised. In terms of targets, which is often set at airports in relation to cargo turnarounds, 6 hours is about the standard target for the turnaround of a aircraft and making it to availability, and 2 hours for express operators and those operators with perishable items. Certainly cargo, combination cargo carrier terminals and also other forms of terminals are taking advantage of any opportunities that can come from and benefit from electronic and automation, tracking the movement of air cargo, while FedEx and other express operators essentially pioneered the use of track and trace. Pretty well everybody involved in the movement of air cargo these days is looking for some form of method to track the movement of air cargo. So barcoding has been quite a prolific one over the years, although it's a little bit of an uncertain science. The readers often misread the labelling. The labels themselves can be damaged, and there's other problems. And I suppose the big hope is that radio frequency ID, or RFID, is going to be something that's going to replace this option in terms of recording and the movement of air cargo. The beauty about RFID is that it's got a lot more capacity to capture information within that computer chip itself, and presents opportunities for greater container security, easier identification, and also meeting the regulatory compliance along the way. Now, the big, I suppose, negative for RFID, it is quite a relatively sophisticated form of information capture, so it's a little bit more expensive. It's quite difficult to put that into an economic scenario and make that work for you, particularly as a all-cargo operator. Now, Walmart over the years have been a real pioneer with RFID, and all their suppliers have been encouraged to take on RFID. So perhaps those type of partnerships might be a better opportunity to take advantage of that particular form of technology. In addition to RFID, there's scanners, sorting, mechanising, and other forms of methods along the way. Just an example of what a typical cargo terminal might look like. We know that Hong Kong is the greatest throughput of cargo in the world. That's an indication of both their airside facilities and also their landside facilities. So they've got about 2 kilometres of airside and 938 positions to manage the incoming movements of aircraft, and they've got room for over 300 on the land side of things. The other side of the terminal, they've got room for 350 types of cargo delivery options. One of the things about probably that makes the Hong Kong airport so good is that they have really high targets in terms of what they do. They have a 95% target on all their service standards, and they report that they meet that on every occasion. And their standards are, if a truck arrives on the land side, they've got a waiting time for within 30 minutes, so you can't wait any longer than that. Cargo acceptance has to be within 15 minutes and cargo release within 15 minutes. In terms of air size, for a passenger flight, they've got to deal with that within 5 hours, freighter flights within 8 hours, and perishable and express cargo within 2 hours. Now, I suppose it's worth making the point that combination carrier terminals, is passenger and cargo, is actually quite different than your integrator or express cargo hub terminals. And primarily that's got a lot to do with the type of facilities required to facilitate that outcome of that door-to-door service and overnight delivery. We know that traditionally integrators has operated it within that space of parcel and also package of less than 30 kilograms. However, that is changing a little bit more as they're starting to move more into that special handling category of air cargo. So automated sorting is certainly the only way that an express operator can operate to meet the service requirements of their promise to deliver overnight. And of course they use a range of different sorting mechanisms along the way. As I mentioned, for express operators, they would prefer to operate in a terminal that has no association with a passenger terminal, and there's been a number of those open up over the last 20 years. Some of the other options available and services available at an airport that need to be considered is ground handling. And in the news today I mentioned to you how ground handling is an important aspect of the movement of air cargo. So typically they've got a range of services and they include things such as warehousing, documentation, and also special freight. So there's a range of services that a ground handling operator can offer. Transport to and from the aircraft, of course, and also air freight trucking services. So they can be quite multi-faceted in terms of the product options. When it comes to ground handling at airports, of course, I think we might have touched on that today. A lot of airlines handle that themselves if they've got quite a decent volume and throughput of goods at that airport. If they haven't, it's probably more economical for them to outsource that to a ground handling agent. Alternatives to that option are that they can take up a strategic alliance with other airlines to actually perform that task for them. They could outsource to handling companies owned by the base airport or to other ground operating companies. In Europe, it's quite common for most of the services around ground handling to be outsourced rather than being operated by the airport themselves. Ultimately, it's an economic evaluation that's going to be made based on generally probably throughput of cargo at that particular airport. Despite how highly automated cargo terminals are going to be, there's certainly, it's hard to get away from the fact that the build-up of ULDs is a labour-intensive operation. They can minimise this a little bit by undertaking those tasks away from the airport, which is often a case and they can also provide those services in bonded warehouses. So third-party ground handlers are often a part of larger groups. So in addition to ground handling, they offer a range of other services, which I've probably touched on already, managing the air cargo, provision of trucking services, and document handling and customs control. One of the largest ground handling organisations in the world is Menzies Aviation. They serve more than 200 airports across 6 continents and offer both landside and airside services. So they've got a number of core components. The main core component, of course, is the ground handling. But in addition to that, other services sought by air cargo airlines are going to be in regards to cargo, in regards to the fuelling, in regards to executive services, and in regards to other services away from the airport itself. And my last couple of slides are some of the ground handling equipment that you might see at an airport. We're starting to really gather a fondness for that particular slide. I think that cool dolly must be something about the word, I'm not sure. But you've got to move the goods, the cargo, onto the aircraft by using some form of equipment, and often it's either a trolley or a dolly. That particular one is a cool dolly. It's a multi-purpose type of equipment that's quite useful. In addition to that, you might have a loader, which is, you might have seen this before. It's typically a platform that can be raised and lowered to enable loading and unloading of ULDs. Certainly makes it a lot easier. You've also got your belt loaders. I've definitely seen that here in Launceston, with vehicles with movable belts for loose cargo, more narrow body, but also for wide body. And of course you've got your pushback tug, which is going to move the aircraft into position when it's ready to leave and also when it arrives, or to go to another part of the airport. And that's all I've got for you today.